I'm Bill Johnson, General Manager of WRTI, here with our guests, Ivan Sigal, the Interim Executive Director of Feeds, and Ryan Merkley, the Chief Operating Officer at NPR. And we're going to have a bit of a conversation, and it's going to be free-ranging, I suspect. There's a lot to cover. If you look at the title of what this session is about, it is how do we envision and build the next phase of public media and public interest technologies, ensuring that they are vital resources in evolving media ecosystems. So, short order.
No big deal.
Big words.
Ivan, I've heard of Blue Sky, and I think I understand what that is. And I read about Feeds, and I was hoping maybe you could lead us off with just giving us a sense of why, what's the difference between the two, and why do we need Feeds?
So Blue Sky was designed as an application to be more or less identical to most of the contemporary social media applications in terms of how users engage with it. But underneath, it's quite different. It operates on the basis of a different protocol. And for those of you who aren't super familiar with internet infrastructure, the protocol layer is basically how computers and technology talks to each other, how they translate signals and norms and ideas within in order to shape kind of a politics of how information is ordered and organized. The protocol that underpins Blue Sky is called the AT protocol, which stands for Authenticated Transfer. And it's really unusual in its architecture. And it, in theory, offers the ability for anybody to build an application or a content moderation system or a news feed generator or one of other 4 or 5 layers within the component architecture on top of it, while sharing a common base of data. So right now, Blue Sky has 35 million users, more or less. I could build an app next to it on top of that pool of data users and have access to both the individuals who are part of that network and also their data, which means that people who might not like the Blue Sky app could go to another sister app and still not lose their community. And that is a way of changing the incentive structure for the technology companies to be more aligned with the interests of their users, because if the app becomes enshittified, as we've talked about earlier in the day, people can leave. So it's called credible exit. That's the theory.
So it's an insulating layer from somebody gaining so much control over the original service and product that it no longer serves the public interest.
That's right.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Ryan, I think everybody in this room knows of NPR, and but I think we all know it based on the experience of having listened to the radio. And there's a lot more to NPR, I'm sure. And I was hoping you could give us a better sense of the sort of full scale and scope of what NPR does.
Well, we only have 21 minutes left, so I'll keep it tight. But I think the most important thing that maybe for this conversation is that NPR is part of a member network. And so our strength is rooted in collaboration. We started the day there with Maria talking about collaboration. I think NPR and its member network starts there. We are known for the content that we produce and share and broadcast, both on podcast and broadcast, but also for a deep collaboration with stations and a set of infrastructure that enables that. Everything from the public radio satellite system, which we operate on behalf of all interconnected stations, not just member network stations, to platforms like Grove, to our ability to help share materials, or to our app, the NPR One app, which has over 1 million known users. I think we are existing in that same kind of world where we want to be more distributed. I hear your example around Blue Sky, and I think of the success of RSS and podcasts. And because of that open and reliable protocol, you get to have podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts, as opposed to on some proprietary platform. We get that because we had an open protocol that made that possible, so users have choice, and so we have those opportunities.
Now, does NPR have any engagement with open platforms such as Blue Sky, or moving in the direction of Feeds in terms of insulating?
We've not been working together yet, but I think the direction that we are all going is going to be one of more collaboration. I think that's look, I think I want to recognize the challenge of this moment that we're all feeling and the pressure that everyone has been under in this time. I think one of the things it's pushing lots of us towards is the feeling of constraint, but the other is the opportunity for collaboration. And I think we're asking ourselves questions about how we can work more together and do better, do more for our audiences, but also do more potentially with less. And one of the best ways to do that is if the thing I build for me, I build for everyone. I come from open source, and so that idea that the things that we build for everyone is the way that we get more out of our collaboration.
You know, the root, one of the underlying ideas of the original internet is that we could have connection without permission. And I think a lot of that has been lost with our current generation of technology intermediaries. And these kinds of open protocols allow us to reestablish those permissionless relationships. The reason we started VR Feeds is because the Blue Sky application and the AT protocol is decentralizable in theory, but the practice of it requires some technical, some regulatory, and some financial changes to make sure that it actually happens. There are also a lot of cultural and social regions that applications might remain kind of centralized or focused around maybe a first mover advantage. So there's a lot of work to be done to try to take that idea, that theory of permissionless connection, and to build it in practice. And that's culture, that's tech, that's regulation, that's law, that's rights. And so as with your example around podcasting, there's a whole ecosystem of developers and creators and financial mechanisms that ensures that the podcasting world is as vibrant as it is. And I think for any other application or any other protocol that we're talking about, a similar kind of ecosystem of support needs to happen.
I think of both of you as representing organizations that hold a tremendous promise and accountability in terms of social impact and change if the technologies are working right. I'm wondering if you can give me a sense of what impact looks like. You know, if you succeed in your work, if NPR succeeds in its work, what does impact look like in terms of public service?
So I think of us in terms of our value as civic infrastructure, as part of a broader community. And I think about what we talked about today. I was actually really struck as I listened to today's presentations and discussions about how much joy was on the stage. And even though I think there's hope and resistance, and we talked about that, and the importance of telling truth to power, speaking truth to power, and the role that journalism plays in doing that and creating an informed citizenry, but also the importance of joy and bringing that to people. And I heard that in the G-Town presentation in particular. I just could feel the joy coming off the stage. I say all that to think that our role is to help build that civic infrastructure, which comes from understanding and knowing each other, having the knowledge we need to make choices for ourselves and our families, and to be active participants in life. And I feel like that work is slow and hard to do. It's easy to break, but it's hard to build. And I think when we do our work well as communities and as stations, that's what we're actually building. That's what your everyday practice of listening is helping to build as a stronger community, and one that makes you resilient to the things that are coming at you every day.
Ivan?
I've been thinking a lot about some of the arguments we heard over the course of the day about the need to have a vision, to build towards something rather than react to something, a positive vision that we are all working for. And I've been in this space a long time, and I'm really interested in moving beyond hype cycles, beyond moral panics around the moment of the event of the moment, and realigning the incentives and conditions upon which we build our communities, our technologies is just a part of it. It's a building block in a larger conversation around what we're doing. So public interest infrastructure and public interest technologies provide a base that allows for things like information fidelity. So we know as information passes through our networks, we know where it's coming from. It's similar to what it's been in the past, and to legibility of our systems, so we can read into the systems, understand them. That is just the basis for then a civic information infrastructure, a public information infrastructure, as we heard with the last talk, or a public media architecture, or good journalism. And all of those pieces are absolutely part an evolved information ecology. They all need to work together. And whatever part of this space you work on, whether you're focused on local, hyperlocal radio, or whether you're working right now, as I am, in somewhere in the protocol layer, if you're only thinking about your own part and not thinking about how it interrelates to the rest of it, I think it's time to start looking, because none of these pieces can exist without the other parts. So for me, a vision is a healthy information ecology that exists for a long time and serves human agency in information and communication systems.
If I could just pick something up off that, because I think one of the things we think about is, often there's this conversation about, what stations do, or what the national organizations or what service organizations do, and the truth is that all of those things exist in an integrated network. And as I have those conversations with various stations, there's a wide range of capacities, ability to deliver, about staffing, about expertise. And at one end of the spectrum, you might have a station that only has 6 people, and only one of those people actually knows or has the capacity or time to put content onto the website. At the other end, you've got stations who have whole development teams. And right now, they often end up working in their silos. They don't have the ability to work together or collaborate in the ways that they might need to. And so one of the things we're trying to think about is, what does a shared service model look like where everybody can benefit, and not every station has to build that capacity, so that the network can serve each other. And so we're trying to think through some of those things. We're trying to be, as you said, more driven by data, and so you can take advantage of that in this modern era. I think there's some rethinking, and I think some transformation to come from that. The name of the session is Evolution, and I think a lot about both how evolution leads to things that fall away, but also that those things that need to be preserved carry forward. I think we're thinking a lot about that now in this sort of difficult moment for public media, about what's most essential, and then how we work together to protect it.
I'll add to that really quickly, which is one of the parts that we're working on is also ideas around shared commons or shared infrastructure, like a content moderation commons for anybody who builds an application or a social mode on top of this protocol. I should also mention that this protocol is explicitly designed for public information, for permanency. So in a time where civic information is vanishing, the means to make it, the means to preserve it is vanishing. This and other protocols and other approaches like it that are basically people collaborating together to preserve the vital information that manages to us as societies is something that we can all collaborate and share and pool our resources on. Yeah.
A follow-up question on this. Who do you, in your own mind, see as the essential stakeholders for this ecosystem to succeed?
I'll start. Well, there has to be a demand side. There has to be people. So my answer begins and ends with people. But of course, people are lots of things, right? So that's an easy answer in some ways. But it is sometimes when you imagine a system, it's very easy to imagine it from the top down. It's like, okay, we're gonna have this regulatory architecture here, and we're gonna have this governance process here, and we're gonna get these pointy-headed people over here, and then if nobody comes to use it, then of course it's a problem. So there has to be the joy, there has to be energy, there has to be value, and I always want to return to the idea that if you don't put people in the heart of an information system, then what are you making it for?
I'd say, in public media, we have a mandate to serve all Americans. And so at the heart of it, we have an obligation to the public. I think in the stakeholder model, I think we're asking a more narrow question about who has a role to play and a part in that. And so we certainly see our member network as first and foremost in there, but we're part of a broader ecosystem in the media and set of responsibilities there. But I think you're right. I think we need to work from the audience out. We need to build from there. There's often this conversation that, we need to operate like a business, but what businesses do is they decide who their exact target is, and everything else is an edge case. They throw that off to the side. And I think if you operate in the public interest, what is often described as an edge case is actually all Americans. And so we don't have that luxury of throwing people off on the edge case. We have to figure out how to serve folks and to reach them in ways that are relevant.
Also, for a lot of businesses in this sector right now, it's their shareholders that are the primary stakeholders. And if we want somebody besides shareholders and then maybe governments to be the ones controlling the discourse, then
This makes me think of one other sort of player in this space that may or may not deserve to have full status. It's AI. What role does AI play in the development of?
I knew you were going to ask that
No
question.
tech conversation is complete until we talk about AI.
I think we learned this morning that AI doesn't exist. Well, but treating normal, but seriously though, removing the hype around it and normalizing it as a concept is very important to do. But anyway, after that silly little interjection, do you want to?
I mean, I'm just glad that the question wasn't about the blockchain, so I'll say that.
That's next.
Yeah. No, I think
Proto's not on the blockchain, by the way.
I think this has been a really interesting and dramatic time watching the tools evolve and move forward. I mean, a year ago, most of the things that were commercially available were in many ways unusable for any of the things that we would want and unreliable. And we've really entered a sort of new wave of that where there's real usability, certainly in this bucket of what I would describe as the infinite interns version of AI, where there are, where it can be the hands but not the head, or where it can be an augmenting factor. And we're certainly seeing some of those things where you can put tools in the hands of the newsroom that can be useful and analytical, and in the hands of a trained journalist and a strong editor, you can do more work than you could have done otherwise. We're seeing that in software development, we're seeing that in the newsroom. And there's some interesting opportunities there, because it's certainly none of us would put up our hands if I asked, do you think you have enough resources in your organization? And so, no one here is thinking about how we eliminate roles. We're thinking about how do we get enough capacity to get done what we need to get done. We have way too much to do. And so I think that to me is really interesting. I think the other thing, and we certainly feel this in our network, is that there's an enormous amount of amazing content that is out there that audiences want, and we don't know where it is. We don't have good visibility into where it is, and so there's the opportunity to have a better view into what is being created and to provide it to those audiences to do exactly what you described, which is provide real value to the audience. I think there's some interesting opportunities there that we'd like to think about. I think from our perspective, we have a higher bar in terms of protecting the trust that we have with the audiences, and we know that they're skeptical about AI in its use in development. And so I think we have to both be transparent, but also be careful about where it fits. I'm less worried about infinite interns. I'm more worried about replacement. And so I think in those instances, I think audiences will be rightly skeptical or untrusting if those things happen. Certainly not on our work plan.
I'll just add really quickly, I think that the thing to try to hold on to is what knowledge is for and what information is for. If information is about computers talking to other computers or systems talking to other systems to create more efficient manufacturing processes or in the service of a corporate entity, corporations are kind of an AI actually, right? They exist in the service of some agentic force that is actually a legal fiction. But if knowledge is for humans and for people, then we really need to safeguard and preserve spaces where people learn knowledge as a process and language and gain meaning in their lives. And I do a lot of work in my previous work. I've done a huge amount of work in translation and in multilingual news communities with Global Voices, where I was for 16 years. And we also often had this debate about whether we were going to allow AI as part of our translation process. And we pretty much pushed it completely out, because the value for the translators was engagement with language and what it does to your brain to experience the speaking and the learning and the writing and the manipulating of words and the pleasure of that and the challenges of that. And as long as we manage to preserve those things as part of learning rather than becoming a kind of an automaton that sits and waits to be fed, in this this endless stream of content that's generated by something outside of a human society. I think that's, to me, the real challenge.
Thank you. I don't want to end without asking, this question, and that is, everything that both of you do requires resources, and investment, and being more efficient with what we have, as well as, innovating ways in which to use new funds. What role do you see for philanthropy in advancing the work that you're describing?
Sure. I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that at some point this week there will likely be a vote in the House to remove over $1 billion in funding from public media. And a good majority of folks in this room are having hard conversations about what that means. And also, as one person said to me when I first took this job, this is a fight we've been having since the Broadcast Act was first passed. We've seen this before. And also, we've never seen this before. And certainly I see folks nodding, and I think we're all feeling that pressure. That said, I think we knew between the rise of AI and the accelerated pace of technology, between declining broadcast audiences and many of these other changes and the demands of listeners, we knew that we were going to have to evolve. And so I sort of think about it as, to the question of where philanthropy can play a role, transformation towards a goal we all want to be part of that protects the things that are most essential about who we are and what we do, and the bridge that lets us get there. Someone once said to me that leadership's job is to run towards the cliff, and the CEO's job is to move the cliff. I feel like we are running towards the cliff, and I think there's an opportunity for philanthropy to work to us to think about what either moving the cliff or building the bridge over it looks like. And I think increasingly those are the conversations I'm having. This is not a sector where people think that we're going to just keep doing what we're doing and there's going to be something to save the day. I think we all know that there's change coming.
Hopefully not handing out parachutes.
Right. Anyway, I think that transformation is really important. I think people are excited about doing it in the way that it lets us protect some of the great things that we've already heard about today. And I think there's a lot of folks trying to do that work. I think it's important that we do it together, and I think there'll be need for a bridge to it as well.
I think slightly different answer. In trying to build a public interest technology stack or an information ecosystem around any protocol or any part of the internet, philanthropy can play a really big role in any of the non-market parts of the conversation. Because with any kind of ecosystem, there are some parts that have market forces. There's investment, there's advertising, and we can talk about the relative value of those things. But there are parts of it around governance, around participation, around standards, around things like public-private partnerships, and around setting up the spaces for conversations in which stakeholders can come together to figure out how to build a set of systems, and to think outside of quarterly or annual financial cycles, to take risk that a market might not want to bear. So all of those places where there's a real risk of failure, or where the market application is simply not at play, or where markets, when they intervene, actually make things worse. And with any kind of new or incipient or emerging technology, there's a moment in time where those kinds of interventions can be especially valuable. So right now, just for example, with Blue Sky, as I said, it is centralizable, but there are still 3 or 4 parts of the protocol that are held by one company. And if they don't let go of it, it's going to look like every other application. And so figuring out how to free up those pieces so that they are de facto run by communities or provide competitive forces, that's part of it. And again, I want to say that I'm not interested in the protocol for the sake of the protocol. I'm interested in it for the sake of information integrity and for the ability for people to, to create and share knowledge together.
Fantastic. Because I like to end on a happy note, maybe both of you could share something that you're excited about that you're seeing in the space right now.
Oh, something that I'm excited about. 3 weeks ago, we had our network fly-in. We had almost 200 folks come in from all over the country. And it was the first fly-in for me, the first one that I've helped to organize. And one of the things we really wanted to do was double down on collaboration. And so my teams and I really said we wanted to show up in a way that made people feel like they were heard. And we really tried to figure out how to do this as a network. At the end of that meeting, I had someone who's been a member of the Public Media Network come up to me. She'd been in the network for over 40 years. She was nearly in tears, and she said, "I've never felt so listened to at one of these meetings." And that made me think that there's a path forward together, and I was excited about that. I'm still excited about that.
So I'm very new in this role. I've been doing it for about 5 weeks. So every day is learning, which is inherently fun, you know. But one of the pieces that I found that really, really interesting is almost like maybe 3 or 4 times a week, I'm talking to somebody who's coming up with a new idea about how to build a tool or a content moderation approach or a way of linking other protocols together or a way of bringing a new social mode to start building a new way of interacting or an old way of interacting onto a new space. And there's just a lot of people willing to give their time and energy to think about building in a new space that hasn't been kind of completely colonized by market. And again, I think it's a rare moment, and probably like 2 years from now, we look back and say, oh yeah, there was that time. And I'm not a nostalgic person in general, but I'm sort of reveling right now in this moment in which I'm not in conflicts with anybody, and every conversation is like, what can we do together? So we'll see.
We'll enjoy the honeymoon.
Exactly.
And on that note, we are out of time, but Ivan Sigal, Ryan Merkley, thank you both so much for such a thoughtful conversation.